gentlemen, welcome to
Well, there you
OCN. And normally I do podcasts like this across our Community Now network and talk about different businesses or different things that are going on. I don't get a chance to do this very often, so I commit to do it about once a month. But in this case, I want to welcome Walt Rakowich to the show. Walt, welcome.
Thanks, Joe. Great to be on.
And Walt, by the way, wrote a book, and I've read this book, and it comes out next week, right, Walt?
Correct. Yes.
This book I have read I read probably 40, 50 books a year, minimum. And I just have a thirst for reading, just for knowledge, how to become a better leader. But this particular book is probably one of the best that I've read in a very long time, if not one of the best. And it has a lot to do with, and the book's called Transfluence, and it's had to lead with transformative influence in today's climate of change. And what we know about in our environment is that there's definitely a lot of change. So welcome to the podcast, Walt.
Great to be on, Joe. Really is my pleasure.
So can you just give everyone, and just introduce yourself, tell them a little bit about you?
Sure. I'd be happy to. So first of all, I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So those of you who aren't Steeler fans, don't hold that against me. Oh, there you go. Joe is.
I didn't know that, but now I do. And all the Broncos fans just went, ah.
Oh, I know, exactly. I love the Broncos too, but I love the Steelers more. Anyway, I like to say, my leadership journey, is molded by so many things, Joe. But the fact of the matter is that for me, it started with my upbringing. And the first thing I like to tell people when I tell people about my upbringing is that I hit the parent lottery. I really did. I was very fortunate. And, my family didn't have a lot of money, a lot of financial wealth or anything like that. What I did have was a wealth of love and support. And one of the coolest things about my parents was that they appreciated people for who they were and not what they had, or not even what they accomplished, because my parents never really accomplished a ton or never had a lot, but they really appreciated people for who they were. And I think that really sort of molded the way I thought about leadership, although I'll be honest, I didn't even think about it at the time. And real quick, I went to Penn State University, graduated there as an accounting major, and I put the green eye shades on for 4 years and worked for Price Waterhouse, which is now PwC. And then something happened to me that one of the things that changed my life is I went back to business school. I was fortunate to get into Harvard Business School, and I also like to tell people, I looked around the first day I was in class. I looked around the room and I realized that I was not the smartest. And as a matter of fact, I was probably one of the least smart people in the room. But, the neat thing about going to school there was that, it raised the bar in terms of my expectations as to what I could, do over time from a leadership perspective. But it didn't raise the bar in terms of, me thinking how brilliant I was, because there were a heck of a lot more people that were more brilliant than me. But the first, I took a job out of business school, and I worked for the best leader that I ever worked for. And the company was called Trammell Crow. And I worked with this guy who...
Small company. It's very small company.
Yeah, very small. But it was in Los Angeles, so we actually had maybe 30 or 40 people working in this office, so it wasn't bad, right? This guy was fun. He was full of life. He treated everybody with dignity. And the most important thing was that he wanted us to improve. He wanted us to be the best we could be. And I started realizing that it wasn't about brilliance. It was more about how you treated people. It was more about, you taking an interest in their lives. And by the way, if you did that, you would accomplish whatever leadership goal you wanted to accomplish, you could accomplish. But it was all about you pouring your life and pouring your time into the people that worked for you. And that's what he did for us. And he made an amazing impact on me. And so to fast forward my story, and the thing that really, helped me write this book and was influential to me, was a leadership journey I had at Prologis. And
Well,
so everybody knows.
let's back up, because in the book you talk a little bit about that journey
Yeah.
through Prologis. But Prologis is one of the largest commercial real estate organizations in the country, in the warehousing in the world, actually, not in the country.
It might be today, I don't know the number, but it probably is in the top three largest real estate companies, not warehousing, just
Yep.
real estate companies, period, in the world. I mean, they have over $120 billion in assets. They're one of the
That's all?
largest companies. That's all.
So,
One of the companies in the S&P 500. I mean, they're just they're just huge. Yeah, but I was with the company. I was probably the 20th employee at the company. It was that was. I mean, I don't know the exact number, but it was small, and it was a startup company. And we started out in the Southwest, and we built the company to a global company in 22 countries. And my journey was from an operating role into the chief financial officer, ultimately the president and chief operating officer of the company. It was a dynamic time to do that. And, rising through the ranks and seeing all different types of real estate and the things we're doing was a lot of fun. But as the story goes, after about 15 years of the company, I worked underneath the CEO as the number two person, as the president of the company. And the CEO was one of the most brilliant people you ever meet in your life. I mean, brilliant, but not really a people person. I mean, believed he was always right, had narcissistic tendencies, believed that he was always right. When you believe you're always right, you don't delegate much. Paid little attention to what people had to say, didn't listen much, and you don't listen much. You're a bit dictatorial, and people were operating in silos in the company. They weren't communicating. We were making mistakes because people weren't communicating. And the most important thing is our culture was just going down the drain. And we had lost trust in each other, the management team, the CEO. And it was just a really weird place to be. And interestingly enough, as Wall Street looked at it from the outside looking in, our stock was trading at an all-time high. This was the end of 2007. But from an inside looking out, it looked pretty bad. And I went to the board of directors and I said, look, guys, I may be the number two person. I may be making a decent amount of money. The fact of the matter is I don't want to be here. Irrespective of the golden handcuffs that you got on me, I don't want to be here. And because I felt like something was going to happen in the company. But little did I know that 2008 would be such carnage in the marketplace. I mean, I think the S&P was down 40% that year. When you look at it. But, so we were down, but we weren't just down 40%. We were down 96.5% by the end of the year. I had left in January. I watched the stock just continue to fall throughout the year. And 10 months later, November 8th, I got a call from the board of directors and they said, Walt, you're right. We have a problem and we want to part with that problem. And we'd like you to come back and turn around the company.
Part with that problem, meaning the current CEO. Yeah. Who will remain nameless right now.
I will name nameless.
Yeah.
My initial reaction was no. In fact, I said to the lead director, I said, I can't do this. He said, what do you mean? I said, I just can't imagine the next 4 years, turning around a company that's on the verge of bankruptcy. I mean, it's just going to be a lot of work, right?
Yeah.
And I said, I don't know, you never, think about it. And I said, how long do I have to think about it? He said, 24 hours. So I did. And I tell you what, I had hired a lot of the people that were there, Joe. And I mean, the more I thought about it, the more I thought, why not? And, so I did. I accepted it. I knew it would be a Herculean effort to turn around the company. But I'm glad I did it. And the interesting thing is, looking back in retrospect, the crucible moments that happen in our lives, we wouldn't wish them on anybody.
Right.
And we don't even want to go through them ourselves, right? But actually, the crucible moments in life are when we learn the most.
It shapes you.
Case, they shape you.
Yeah.
They shape your character, right? And in my case, that crucible moment, and that wasn't that minute, but it was the next 3 years, shaped the way that I thought about leadership, shaped this whole notion of transfluence in my mind about how you lead people. And at the end of the day, we successfully did it. When I say we, it wasn't me. It was my management team, and it was all the employees that were there that did it. As a leader, my job was to galvanize it, not to brilliantly lead it myself, but to galvanize it. And that's really what Transfluence is all about.
Yeah, and if I can just, I've read the book, and I want to tell everyone why we're having this show. We're going through an immense amount of challenges over the last 6 months. And people are really going through this season of change. And whether it's kids having to stay home and learn new ways, or going to Zoom, where we literally are having most of our meetings remotely, there's changes that are happening. There's changes that are happening in our society very quickly that starts to erode the environment, even where you work, your ability to be productive. And in our organization, we have 195 people, right? And across the entire organization. And it's been difficult, right? And so as I read this book, there's three, it's called the 3H. And maybe you could tell everyone a little bit about that, but the core to this transformative leadership, this leading from the front. You want to tell us about it?
Yeah, I'll go through the 3H core, and I'll tell you the story behind it. It was awesome. When I first took over, one of the things I struggled with a little bit was, what values did I want to lead by? Not that I mean, there's intuitive values that we all have. But when you're a leader, you're kind of searching for the elevator speech. Kind of what someone asks you, what are you all about? Or what kind of people do you hire in this organization? Like all kinds of things. And I was thinking about this, and I got a call from an investment banker friend of mine who worked for Morgan Stanley. And remember, in 2008, this is December 2008.
Oh,
by the way, Morgan Stanley's going bankrupt. Goldman Sachs is going bankrupt.
Bear
so imagine.
Stearns.
Bear Stearns, and there was a front page article on Prologis in the Wall Street Journal, talking about our pending potential bankruptcy. We were a pretty visible company back then, and still are, obviously are today. And so I said, yeah, I would love to talk to. He said, do you want to talk to the CEO of Morgan Stanley, John Mack? I said, I would love to do that. And so I get on the line with Mack. And by the way, Mack was one of the more revered leaders in the investment banking business. People love John Mack that worked for John, And so I thought, it'd be interesting to kind of talk to a guy like this, right? So I said, John, I just want to, I read about TARP, and I'm reading about, the Fed and, trying to jam banks together, and the Treasury Secretary and all that stuff. Don't tell me about that. I just want to hear one thing. How are you managing your people? He says, well, I manage my people on the basis of the 3 H's. And I said, what in the heck is that? He said, you might think of me as a cold-hearted investment banker. He said, but the fact of the matter is, the best leaders in the world are leaders that are humble, honest. And then he said, in this day and age, a banker needs to have a sense of humor. And I laughed, and I said, well, there's the proofs in the pudding. I just thought that was one of the funniest things I heard. And you remember things 10 years later.
Yep.
You might forget the entire conversation, but you remember that. I remember going home, and I start thinking about, what does that mean? Like, what does it really mean to be humble? What does it mean to be honest? And what does it mean to be humorous? And I realized that I really wasn't a humorous person.
I'm the funniest guy in our entire company, so I don't know. Yeah. As Josh, the producer, laughs at me right now. Maybe not true.
But what John was really talking about wasn't being humorous. It was being human. It was connecting with people, whether it be in a humorous way or whether it be through just, acting out with your heart. That's what he was talking about. And so when you dissect those 3 words, humility, and you read about humility in the dictionary, and Webster says, well, it's weak, it might be unassertive, it might be submissive. You read all these words, you say, man, that's not leadership. But let me tell you, real humility takes courage. Real humility is not about being weak. It's about admitting you have weaknesses. And by the way, we all do. And the minute that you begin to unleash that, it's liberating. And you begin to talk about what your weaknesses are. It's liberating and, in essence, become vulnerable. But when you do that, you defeat the very fears that you have about it, you know? And when you diffuse that, you build trust in the organization. In the book, in Transfluence, I talk a lot about the importance of building trust. I think the best leaders build trust, but they don't build trust by being self-absorbed. They build trust by being humble, build trust by being transparent and by brutal honesty, you know, and saying things that maybe people don't want you to say, but you got to. And maybe they don't even make you look good, but you got to say them. And by having a heart, you know, and when I say having a heart these days, especially in this COVID environment, man, you know, leaders have to lead with empathy. You know, they have to lead with understanding. They have to lead by lifting people up. You know, they have to lead by recognition, by giving people credit. That's what I mean by leading with a heart. And so actually, over the next 10 years, what John Mack's words mean to me mean even greater than the day that he told me about them. And they're really a central part of the book. And I talk in the book, I dissect it. I talk a lot about what humility means. I talk a lot about what brutal honesty means, especially in a turnaround. And I talk about, you know, what heart means, leading with a heart.
You know, and that leads me, and I don't want to get too far off track because there's lots for us to talk about the book itself. But I do want to, if I could quickly talk about just what you're doing now, right? And one of the things when we were talking when we started talking that I just took away from that is just your unselfish desire to serve others, right? And so, can you talk a little bit about what you're doing right now, and you know how what you taught in this book, what you're actually written in this book, you've applied in every part of your life going forward from the.
Yeah, so Joe, before I became CEO, I read a book that was really influential to me, and it was called Halftime. And for those of your listeners, those of your listeners out there, it was written by a gentleman who, unfortunately, about a year ago or so, passed away. His name is Bob Buford. And quite frankly, it's a bit of a faith-based book for those of your listeners who are driven by faith, but you don't have to be driven by your faith to really resonate with it. The book was called Halftime, and the tag underneath of it was called Taking Your Career from Success to Significance. And I thought about it, and I was in my early 50s at the time when I read it, and I thought, man, if I ever had a stopping off point in my career, would I want to go back and double down and, in essence, if you will, make more money or continue to double down in the career that I've already spent 30 years in? Or how would I spend that time if I had a stopping off? Well, after 4 years of the turnaround, I really felt strongly about leaving Prologis and, in essence, spending half of my time giving back. And I didn't know what that meant day one. I really didn't. But I devote probably 50% or more of my time now to charitable efforts. And one of the organizations that I got really involved with is a company, an organization called Colorado Uplift, which now we've taken it national. It's in 11 cities outside of Colorado under the name of Elevate USA. But essentially what we do, and this is really relevant to what's going on today in terms of racial inequality as well. So what we do is we go into public schools and we educate kids, minority students, all minority students, and those that haven't grown up with much financial means. They have to, in order to qualify, they've got to be what you call free and reduced lunch kids, which their parents make under a certain amount of money. But we teach them about morals, ethics, leadership. We teach them about courage. We teach them life skills that, unfortunately, they don't get at home. Their parents don't teach them. And interestingly enough, when you think about it, we don't even teach that in the schools today. We teach math, we teach science, but we don't teach courage. We don't teach leadership. We don't teach a kid how to be mission driven. And I got to tell you, it's been a huge success. This organization's been around for over 40 years now in Colorado. And today we serve 4,000 kids a year. And we teach them about it. We mentor them in the evenings because in many cases, their parents are incarcerated. They might have a dad or mom that's in jail or potentially on drugs, and they just don't have anybody to go home to, and talk with about these things. So we literally provide 24/7 mentoring and leadership to them, and we teach them in the public schools about what it means to be a leader. And so I'm very passionate about that. I spend a lot of my time doing that, and a number of other things as well.
Yeah, so I'm sorry that I deviated a little bit, but I was very impressed. The more research I did on Colorado Uplift, the more I was just amazed at the impact that you're having on communities, but also more importantly of how many kids are. I was surprised by that number. There's about 95,000 kids in the Denver public schools, and about 68,000 of those, or nearly 2/3 of those, are on free or reduced lunches. So it just shows an epidemic of a problem with the need, or at least it shows a larger need than that hopefully you get an opportunity to service in the future.
Yes, and I think and now with what we see happening in the last 3 or 4 months, I think it's even more important. Look, there's not one solution. We know that, and our hearts need to be changed over time as well. But there is one solution out of many, which is educating kids in the inner city about right, wrong, good, and bad.
Right.
And I very, very much feel strongly that if we can do that, we can change society.
Yeah, so let's go back to Transfluence again. So where does the word Transfluence come from, and what's the meaning behind it? So give me how'd you come up with that title? And it's a pretty powerful word, but it's now going to show up in the new, the Urban Dictionary. We're going to get it in the Urban Dictionary. I'm going to make sure I put it in there now. But tell us a little bit about that word.
Absolutely. So my team and I, and I have a team of people. These days it takes a team. It takes a village to do all the things you've got to do. And when we were first writing the book, we kept talking about making a transformational influence in the lives of other people. Transformational influence. That's what leadership is all about. How do we influence other people? We kept thinking, okay, well, we can't use that word transformational influence as the title of a book. It's just too long. And so somebody in the meeting said one day, what about Transfluence? And we all looked at each other and we said, what a name. Isn't that awesome? So then the first thing we did was we looked it up in the dictionary. And there isn't a word transfluence, but there is a word transfluent.
Yeah.
Okay. So we looked it up and we said, and it refers to a stream of water that's kind of running next to you, or maybe something that runs through. It could be electricity that runs through a wire. Okay. And we thought, geez, Transfluence is actually something quite similar. And that is, it's about heart, and it needs to flow through a leader. It needs to flow through a leader's heart. And so we talked about that. We write about that in the book. But actually, the name Transfluence itself is not in the dictionary. And so you're right. Maybe we should coin this.
We just need to put it in the Urban Dictionary. I'll get it. I'm serious. I think we should put it over there.
Yeah. But it starts off. Look, it starts off with the notion. Here's the thing I tell people all the time. When you're a leader, you're hired to do a job.
Yeah.
Now, your job might be, the thing that the board of directors would say was that Walt's job in 2008 was to turn around the company and make us financially solvent. Okay? To me, that's the destination. Too many leaders focus on the destination, but they don't focus enough on the journey. And you see, the journey is more important than the destination. And if you do the journey right, you'll get to the destination. And I came to realize that the journey is about other people. It's not about you. And if you can get in that mindset as a leader where you don't come to work every day thinking about yourself, you come to work thinking about how can I help whoever it is around me be better, okay? If you can think that way, then you're focused on the day-to-day in the journey, you'll get to where you want to get because you'll build imminent amount of trust. When people see you investing in their lives and seeing you invest in them, trust me, they're going to trust you. And when they trust you, and when you show trust in them, they trust you. And that's what it's all about, man. You got to build that ecosystem in the organization.
And
So
trust
that's what
leads to,
about.
yeah, so it's amazing that you actually say that, because trust leads to accountability, right? That ability to trust inside the organization leads people in the organizations to actually to look for themselves, to be held accountable, and be okay with the consequences of even the times that they have to be held accountable where the outcome is maybe not the most, appealing or most popular, right? So
Exactly. But what it means, though, oh no, go
no,
ahead.
no, go ahead, go ahead, go ahead.
No, what it means, I'm happy to get into this too, but I think it means that you need to be vulnerable as a leader. You have to be vulnerable. And man, that is so hard for leaders to do. After all, you got to that position not because you were vulnerable over time, but because you did something. And it's easy to be prideful about the things that you did. It's easy for you to wake up every morning and say, wow, I've really risen up the ranks, right? That's why I'm leading today. But it's counterintuitive. To me, leadership, and I'm not saying you always need to be vulnerable. That's not the case. But you need to be willing to be at times, because it's empowering to other people. And back to your point on accountability, people feel accountable whenever you trust in them. You give them something, and you say, I'm trusting in you. That in and of itself is accountability. And if you as a leader aren't willing to be vulnerable and give that up, you'll never get there.
Yeah. It's really interesting that as I read your book, again, I read lots of books, and I was looking at Josh as you were talking, going, you're talking about the journey. I always tell people on the team here, hey, look, I'm really, really excited and honored to be on this journey with you. And so we lead from this inside of our organization from a place of humility. But the action items that are in this book, the things that you're able to get out of the book, that even if you're not in the leader where you're leading the organization, the type of things that you're reading about conceptually, or that can actually occur by following some of these standards and some of these ideas, can help you at every level of leadership, right? And so go through that with me. So give me some of the principles, key principles that are in your book, because obviously I don't want to be teaching the teacher, or I would sit here and say, okay, so in chapter 6 and chapter 4, and it's amazing because I read a lot, but what kind of advice is given through the book? What kind of ideas are given through the book that are going to help people in their leadership roles?
So I would start off by saying a couple of things. Again, let's set this. I think it's about building trust in the organization. But the question is, how do you build trust? I think the first thing you've got to do as a leader, step by step, is I think you've got to think about, understand, and overcome your fears and pride. I think the two greatest challenges that every leader has are fears or pride, and probably both. HBR did an article several years ago where they talked about, they interviewed over 100 C-suite executives, not just CEOs, but C-suite executives. They asked them, what is your biggest fear? In fact, I think the name of the article is, what do CEOs fear, right? You might have thought, well, I fear the financial condition.
I can tell you a lot of things.
Or I fear my people are going to leave, or,
Yeah.
No. The number one fear was that leaders would underachieve, kind of the imposter syndrome, or that they feared that they would be politically attacked. Anyway, they go through all of these fears. There's 5 of them. And the amazing thing is it was all about the leader. And so you realize, pride and fear are really, really bad things. They're killers. And don't get me wrong, pride is good if you say, well, I got pride in my company. I got pride in my children. That's fine. But when I'm talking about pride, I'm talking about arrogance. I'm talking about hubristic pride. I'm talking about vanity. I'm talking about egotism. I'm talking about the things that brought down FIFA, or almost brought down FIFA. Talking about the scandal of Volk. I'm talking about Pro 2008. That kind of still killing you. And pride. Pride is the same thing. So I talk in the book a lot about overcoming persons. The second thing, I think you've got to open teacher. I talk about communication. I talk about, we live in a transparent world, and that world demands transparency from its leaders. Yep. And I think that the expectations of leaders are so much greater today because of the world that we live in. I talk a lot about building a strong core of authentic values. I think we live in a world of false narratives. And in order to combat that, I think the more authentic your values are, the more believable you are. And I think it's important that leaders do that. And then I also talk about demonstrating purpose. I think it's critically important that leaders demonstrate purpose, that they have a true North Star and they point all of their employees in that direction. It might be what does the organization stand for? It might be what is the organization doing? But people need to feel good about where their organizations are, where their leadership is going. And I think you as a leader need to show that. And I think if you start doing those sorts of things, I think you can build a tremendous amount of trust in your organization. So that's a long-winded answer. I apologize.
No, it's a good answer. And building trust is very difficult because it does require you to get in the trenches. It does require to be authentic, right? And it does require you to set some of your pride aside, which can actually influence, it can influence the culture. It actually adversely affect the culture and the ability for people to want to stay engaged in the organization, which leads to people wanting to leave, right? So I want to go back to, you wrote this book after, obviously, you left Prologis. You left Prologis in 2012. So can you and I just, for everybody that's listening, you brought it back from the brink of bankruptcy, right? So can you describe the framework just when you walked into that situation and some of the things that are in Transfluence that, that you had to basically, what tools you had to use personally in order to create that framework to bring them from that brink of bankruptcy?
Well, there's a lot of stories, but I'll tell you one story that was impactful to me that's in the book. And I'm going to get back to this story of vulnerability for the moment, because it's easier for me to talk about stories than it is specifics. So we were, the good news is we ended up not going bankrupt, which was great. We were on the verge. And the amazing thing was that we never got sued in the entire process, which is really amazing. But we were sitting there a week or two before Christmas. I'd taken over the job about, a month before that. And we're all sitting around, and it was a finance meeting. And by the way, it was 1 o'clock in the morning, roughly, because we were working dog years. Crazy, crazy time. And one of my finance directors said, "Walt, I got some bad news." I said, "What's that?" And he said, "The bad news is that we're going to blow our covenants on billions of dollars in bonds, and because they're all cross-collateralized." And I said, "Well, wow, when is that going to happen?" I mean, and he said, "Well, I think we're going to hit our earnings. We're going to hit our first earnings deficit in the first quarter, and the covenants on the bonds depend on your earnings. And so when your earnings go down, you blow the covenants, and therefore, your creditors can come after you as a company." So I said to him, "Okay, well, what's it look like? What do we got to do?" And he said, "Well, we're going to have to file for bankruptcy in January." Now, this is, December 20th or something. And I immediately got white as a ghost. I mean, I was so afraid. I mean, I just didn't know what to do. And I looked at everybody in the room and I said, "You guys mind if I take a walk?" And this also tells you how lonely a job it is, not just being a CEO, but a leader, right? So I walked down the hallway and I started fainting. And in the distance was a chair. And I remember seeing the chair and thinking if I could get to the chair, I could at least sit down and get through this. And unfortunately, I didn't make it. And I hit the corner of the desk with the corner of my head above my left eye and split my head open. And I was laying there for 10 minutes or so, which probably seemed like eternity. And I woke up and I had no idea, Joe, where I was. None. It was dark outside. And
I
then
was going to
about
make a
30
political joke, but I'm glad I didn't.
Yeah, 30 seconds later, and the first thing that hit me is, oh my gosh, there's about 10 people still waiting in the room for me to come back. So I went to the bathroom and I made sure that I, got the bleeding to stop, and the pool of blood was still on the floor. There wasn't anything I could do about that.
Wow.
I come back in the room and I said, okay, well, let's talk about this bankruptcy thing. And my CFO looks at me and he says, no, let's talk about that egg on your head first. And I realized I was powerless, man. I had no idea how to deal with this. I had no idea. And I look around the room, and it was the most vulnerable moment that ever hit me. I looked at everybody in the room and I said, guys, I'm the CEO of the company, and I don't have any of the answers. I have no idea. I said, matter of fact, I think the answer lies with you guys. And, it was a moment of vulnerability. It was a moment that no leader ever wants to go through. It was a moment where leaders feel like they can be politically attacked, all those things. But it was astounding what happened. A couple people in the room, there was about 30 seconds of silence, which seemed like eternity. And they looked at me and one guy said, you know what, well, we got you. We got your back. We're going to come up with a solution. Give us a week or two, and let's get back together. And you know what? They solved the problem. I didn't. They did. And I realized, that leaders, actually the people that work for you, 9 times out of 10, no, maybe 10 out of 10, they know more about what's going on than you do.
Right.
So why wouldn't you ask? Why wouldn't you empower them? Why wouldn't you give them every opportunity they have to, in essence, be the solution, right? Too often leaders think they're in the position to be the solution. No, we're the facilitator. We gotta, we're like conductors in an orchestra, not soloists. I'd like to tell people all the time, you know what? The soloist gets up and they play, and everybody gives the soloist a standing ovation and they bow, and it's all about them. But at the end, when the conductor, when everybody gives the whole symphony the round of applause, the conductor, he or she may bow, but really what they do is they point to the orchestra in deference to the orchestra, right? They give the orchestra credit. That's what the best leaders do. The best leaders empower people. They give them credit. They recognize that they got more of the answers that their people have more answers than they do. Right? And it was a moment of vulnerability that I felt was really powerful in the company, not just for the people that worked for me, but for me too, to realize that, come to that realization.
I have to tell you, and this is me not taking and again, after reading this book, I put it on I put it on my Facebook page, I put it everywhere, LinkedIn. And I said, look, if there's ever a book that I would recommend you reading, it's this book. And a lot of the principles that you have in this book are the principles that I live my life by inside of our company. And so it was validation for some of that, but also gave us more opportunity to look at how can I as a leader, right? Obviously, I'm the CEO of the company. How can I as a leader do better? Like, how can I actually empower our team? And through COVID, we did empower the team. And frankly, when March came around, and we have a lot of clients all over the country, it was difficult because I walked into a room and said, okay, guys, what are we going to do? And I didn't have the answer either. But by watching people on the team just come and say, look, I'm going to handle this part, and hey, let's innovate in this area. And I'm like, well, we have nothing to lose. Our revenue for the foreseeable future is going to be down 70, 80%. And the big thing for me was, how did we suffer through this kind of terrible beginning, right? To make sure that we also didn't lose anybody on the team, right? And that was
Yeah.
a big thing for me, is how did I preserve the people on the team? And it was a big fear. I'm a fearless guy, but there's a big fear that I have that I would negatively influence someone else's life and that we would lose someone on our team, because our team, our company is like a family, right? So we support each other in lots of different ways. This book just hit home for me, and it's giving me different opportunities to kind of manifest some of the opportunities that you spell out in Transfluence into our organization as well. So I actually am going to ask you a question, but I already know the answer to that question personally, but the people that are listening, they don't know the answer. But can you tell me how your book differs from other leadership books? And why does this format make it more effective, even given some of the things that you're talking about are driven by character, right? It's driven by, having good character in leadership. But how does it make it different than other leadership books?
Well, I would be interested. Well, first of all, I'm going to tell you why I think it is, but I would also, Joe, be interested, since you've read it, in hearing you too. But
right.
Your thoughts. Here's I would say a couple things. Number one, actually, most leadership books, I hate to say this, but are written by consultants. And there's nothing wrong with being a consultant. And the good news about being a consultant is you can go around and see a bunch of different companies, and you can sample a lot of different things and see examples. And the fact of the matter is that this book is written by a CEO who went through it, and who went through a crucible moment, or crucible moments that, and I think unless you're in that position, you never completely understand it. So that's the first thing. I think the big thing, though, is that many leadership books talk about how you can benefit as a leader by doing X, Y, and Z. And this book does too. But this book is about how your people can benefit by you paying attention to them, and in some respects, getting out of the way. Or getting out of your own way is what I should say, maybe put it that way. Its central theme is it's not about you. And I think that that's contrary to a lot of leadership books, which are kind of more self-help books. They're about, like, how can you help yourself? No, this is all about, it's good to be self-aware, but how do you get out of your own way and let other people, do the work? And how do you lead them? How do you make them better at what they do? I think it has a human tone to it that at least a lot of the leadership books I've read lack.
So do you want to know that was
yeah.
All right. So I read a lot of self-help books, right? Because frankly, I'm always introspective and looking at how I can become better and how I can serve people in our companies better. But one of the things that I got out of it is what you said, that it was written by a CEO, and it's not a utopian dream. So a lot of these books, I take what I can out of it, but it's not written from a position of experience. I always feel like, well, I can't really implement those things. Like, what does that look like? How do I I like to turn things into nouns, like things that I can actually pick up, right? Because then that engine or that machine helps me become better, and I can actually then visualize what it looks like to get to a solution or get down that path by following that idea. And the things that are written in this book are from the perspective of actually happening and not happening through success. So many books are written from an idea like, look at me. I mean, Gary, was it Vaynerchuk? You know what I'm talking about? His live video. Do you know what I'm talking about? Come on, help me out here. So many of the books out there are written from a position of, look at me, I'm great, I'm great, I'm great, I'm great, I'm great. And they don't share any vulnerabilities. They don't share any downfalls. They don't share any crisis, right? And the crises they do are typically someone else's crisis, not their own. And so just having the transparency that you had in the book and the difficulty leaving Prologis when you did, but then coming back. And that takes a lot of humility too. It takes a lot of grace to come back into a situation following up what certainly was not a good situation, dropping from $75 a share to $2 a share, right? Or $2.60 a share. So the book.
I appreciate saying that. Thank you.
So I'm gonna Can you touch on what you call the environment of leadership and the climate of change? Like, what do you mean by
Yeah.
that? So,
So here's what I mean by that. First of all, let me put things into context. I'm going to go back to 1979 when I first took my job in college, out of college, Price Waterhouse. I think back then leadership was more command and control. I think back then, leadership paid very little attention to what people had to say. I think back then people were less critical, less vocal. There was no social media. There was no way to criticize management. In some respects, your jobs were more transactional, meaning that you went to work for a paycheck and the company paid you, and if you didn't like it, you left. They needed a job done, they paid you. I mean, I hate to be so blunt about it, but that's the way it was in 1979. When I took over as CEO, I received the first day, and keep in mind our stock's down 95%, so there's a reason for this, but the first day I had over 1,000 calls and emails, over 1,000, okay? From everything from sell-side analysts to rating agencies to investors to news publications to social media outlets, okay? Some of them demanding that I get back to them, some of them congratulating me. Online chats were rampant about our future and about my leadership. We live in a world with greater access to information. We live in a world with greater diversity. And we live in a world with accelerating progress. And in many respects, and I call them climates of change in the book, in many respects, those climates are tremendous in terms of their opportunities they create. Okay, we're more productive as a society, without question. We have had no inflation as a society because of technological advances. I mean, we can talk about a lot of the positives. But they create challenges for leaders. They create challenges that we didn't have 20, 30 years ago. Why? Because we all live in a world of glass houses and everybody can see everything we do. And they can criticize anything and
quite
everything
literally.
that we, quite literally. We have fewer face-to-face interactions. We have a more distributed workforce that we've got to deal with today. We've got more voices to be heard, more opinions, an overabundance of false narratives out there to deal with. I mean, leading today is so much more difficult than it was leading 30 years ago, in my view. And if you want to lead in a command and control way, forget it. People just walk out. You know, when unemployment was 3.5%, people just walk out. Well, I don't really want to work for you. So how do you lead in this environment? And I think it requires a more constant drumbeat of transparency and communication. It requires values-based leadership that people can believe and follow, and leaders that lead by example. And it requires leadership that enforces the human element through empathy and through recognition and through credit and through purpose and all of those things. And if you don't have that as a leader in today's market, unfortunately, I think people recognize that. They'll criticize you for it and they'll likely leave. And if you want to attract the best employees in the world, that's how you attract them. So that's what I mean by the climate today.
Yeah, you've brought up false narratives, and it seems like we optically take pictures of just a snapshot in time, and that becomes the narrative that we run with. So we don't understand, historical relevance or what happened before or what happened after it, and so it makes it more difficult. From a CEO's position, it makes it much more difficult to lead. But there's a huge opportunity, I think, that to lead courageously. I like to say that courage is as infectious as fear. And that by giving people the opportunity to take them through that process and do so with humility and do so with a heart, having empathy for them, you find that the outcome is far more trusting, right? So, being honest with people is very difficult because sometimes they're eating a sandwich they don't want to eat. And being able to get through that just requires a whole lot of, I use the word grace quite a bit just because I think it's an important word, but more importantly, I've found that, there's so many varying opinions as well, right? So it used to be, people didn't talk politics at work. They just did their work and went home. It was very transactional. And now when you have larger workforces, they communicate about those things. And that is a tendency, I think, to build a much more difficult climate to manage in as well, because people are making judgment calls about people based on that snapshot or even that individual conversation. So it's from a CEO standpoint, I will tell you that's the thing I got most out of this book, is the ability to kind of work through that, right? And to have enough to lead by such a way that you can get people to want to engage and not want to leave, right? Not say, okay, cut dry. I don't like your ideas in this area. I don't like the way you think about these things, but to learn to respect others around you, which I think is a big part of having a productive atmosphere or culture.
Environment. Yep, I agree.
Okay, so I want to give people a couple of things. One, I want to get people to, and we're going to put it down in the comments below, or I think it is in the comments below, of how they can actually get your book. But why don't you tell everyone how they can get your book? And then if there's one thing that, one word you'd use to describe what this book would bring to someone. If you're a leader, if you're an emerging leader, I've read the book here. I got to read it before everyone else did. I will actually, Walt, have you sign it at some point and write me a really good note in there that says, "Right on, Joe." But if you could just touch on just one word to describe what people are going to get out of it, right? And then tell people where they can actually go. Tell our audience where they can actually go to buy your book.
Well, the one word that comes to my mind is trust. I don't know if that's what they'll get out of it, but I think that's what it will help them build, is trust. I talk about in the book, it is the most essential thing that you can have as a leader is trust in your organization, between you and your people and you. And so trust is, I hope that your readers will walk away with, if you will, an ability to think about how they can build trust in the organization. In terms of how they get a hold of me, my website is, and I'll need to spell my last name, but my website is waltrakowich.com, and that's WALT, and the last name RAKOWICH.com. I'm on Twitter at Walt Rakowich, and my LinkedIn address is Walter Rakowich. Those would be the best places to get a hold of me.
Awesome. And are you available to speak to large groups or to organizations as well?
Yes, I will do a limited amount of speaking engagements down the road. I have, I also sit on 3 corporate boards. I sit on my university's board at Penn State. I chair the audit committee for all 4 of those boards, and I'm very involved in inner city. So I really will limit the number of speeches that I'll do, but I'm happy to spend some time on.
You know why I was asking you that, right?
Yeah.
Well, I want to just bring something up that your non-negotiables that is in chapter 8, right? And that chapter is called Embracing Transparency. Probably one of my favorite chapters in the book. And it says, my non-negotiables are embodied in 3 personal traits, and all I do, I want to be. And those are, you obviously know this, but it says 1, a person of excellence, 2, a person of integrity, and 3, a person who is accountable. And I think that just embodies people of success, people that are successful. Those are the 3 non-negotiable traits that I find most common in those leaders that I come across. So,
thank you.
Oh, Gary Vaynerchuk. That was the guy I was talking about earlier. Not to give him any, but yeah. But he's always talking about how great he is. And I'm like, okay. I listen to him every now and then I just get my fill and I got to go.
Yeah, I don't think you'll never hear me talking about how great I am. That's for sure. I learn every day, and I'm just another person, just like everybody out there. I was just blessed to be able to lead. I want to. I don't know how close we are to ending, but I do want to tell you a quick story. I think leadership is about attitude, and it dawned on me. I was on a call last week with Ed Bastian, who is the CEO of Delta Airlines. And this is a guy whose revenues were down 95% between February and March, right? And I think they're still down about 70% right now. And Ed said, this is the time that we were anointed for, this leadership time. He said, this is a blessing, not a burden. He said, it's an amazing time and a chapter in our lives. And he said, what an honor and privilege it is to be managing at a time like this. What a man with an attitude. And that's the way I think about leadership as well. I mean, I'm just a servant out there, man. I mean, I'm just, I'm no different than the people that I lead. And we as a team made it happen in Prologis. And I think the more people think that way, I think the better the results.
That is an awesome story, and I'll tell you that positive, just having that positive look on the situation and finding innovative ways to lead through when people are scared. I mean, people in any industry right now are scared. They're scared about the future holds, and just having that positive outlook on what the future holds for people in those environments as a leader, it becomes infectious as well. It becomes something that they want to follow, right?
Absolutely.
Well, I do want to thank you for coming in. We're coming to the end, but any final words that you want to give us?
Well, the final word I want to leave you with is that it's not about the destination, it's about the journey. And the journey might be tough. The journey right now is tough for Ed Bastian. The journey for Walt Rakowich in 08, 9, and 10 was really, really tough. But the funny thing is, I might every once in a while be proud of the destination, but the fact of the matter is that my most memorable aspect of it all was the journey. It's all the stories. It's the fun that I had with the people, and it might not have been fun at the time, some of the things, but looking back on it, it sure is great. And I would just encourage all your leaders that I know this is a difficult time with COVID right now. I know we're all dealing with weird stuff that we weren't dealing with a year ago. But keep your head up, keep your attitude good, enjoy the journey as much as you can.
All right, Walt, I just want to thank you for joining us. The book is called Transfluence. It's going to be in the new Urban Dictionary. We're going to make sure that word makes it there. And it's how to lead with transformative influence in today's climate of change. Walt, again, thank you it's been an honor to spend this last hour with you. And for all those that are listening, this will all be available on a podcast as well. And we look forward to seeing you again. Thanks, Walt.
Thank you, Joe. Appreciate it.
All right.